Hey guys, welcome to another round of Fortnite and Macbeth. Today I wanted to talk about Lady Macbeth in particular, coming back to the Basilikon Doron, because obviously it doesn't just give an outline of what it's like to be a king and what the expectations are there. It also goes into pretty elaborate detail about what is expected of a king's wife. And I think there's a lot of applications that we can make to how Lady Macbeth is meant to behave. And so let's get into it. If you are new to the channel, let me just fill you in on the fact that essentially what we do here is talk about GCSE English things while I play a bit of Xbox. So, anyways, Lady Macbeth is meant to be a helper to Macbeth. At least that's according to King James and what he believes a queen should be. Someone who is there to serve his king, serve her king, to help him, and women in general, their role in the house during the Jacobean period is to help keep their husbands on the righteous path, to keep them on the godly path, make sure that they're making the right choices, behaving in the appropriate way. Which, obviously, we know Lady Macbeth does a really terrible job of. But when we move beyond this idea of helpmate, we can also look at some of the other characteristics. Now, King James explicitly says for his son in the text that a woman is ordained as helper, not hinderer. So we can also look at Lady Macbeth as a hindrance. Yes, she's a helper in the sense that she helps Macbeth achieve his greatest ambition, becoming king, and she knows that he couldn't do it on his own. But ultimately, she's the one that seals his fate. She's the one who sets everything in motion, and to a degree, we can then say that Lady Macbeth is responsible for Macbeth's ultimate downfall. Because she is the one that seals his fate. She's the one who pushes him to commit regicide, which obviously being one of the greatest sins that he commit, sets him up for his ultimate downfall and his decline. So in that regard, she's also his greatest hindrance. And a quote that you can use to link to that is when she says that she wishes she could pour her spirits in his ear, and kind of will away all the things that impede him from the golden round. The golden round obviously being the crown. Further on in the text, King James talks about a king commanding his wife as her lord. And obviously, throughout the majority of the beginning of Macbeth, it is not Macbeth who commands his wife, it is Lady Macbeth who commands him, kind of through and through. She is the one giving all of the commands and the control. You'll remember when Macbeth says that King Duncan is coming to visit, and he's quite anxious and nervous about going forward with the plot to assassinate Duncan. She's the one who tells him to bear welcome in his eye, his hand, his tongue, to look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. So she's the one who's commanding him to do these things. You'll remember she's the mastermind of the murder plot as well, detailing who they will frame, how they will go about it, what actions Macbeth must take. So in no way, shape, or form is Macbeth the one commanding his wife, at least at the beginning of the text. We also see King James talking about cherishing her as helper, and we don't see a whole lot of cherishing at the beginning. We see the dearest partner of greatness, and we later, after the murder of Duncan, see him tell her to be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, and then to celebrate the deed when she will ultimately find out that he is plotted for the murder of Banquo and Fleance. But it's at that point that we see him exclude her from that political sphere, which is also quite interesting because King James is very, very clear about the fact that a king's wife has no place in government, in politics, in the commonwealth of the country. She is to rule the house and nothing else. And so the way that Lady Macbeth tampers with and intervenes in the politics, the monarchy, the government, and generally the welfare of Scotland, that would be completely frowned upon by King James. And of course, you can then make those connections to explore why Shakespeare is presenting those ideas. How is this fitting in with King James's agenda, in which he wants to, legitimize his reign, teach his son about what good kingship looks like, and encourage those kingly positive behaviors to command the respect and the admiration of his people. And we can see yet again that Shakespeare's used the characters of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and their quite atypical relationship as husband and wife as yet another demonstration of why Macbeth is not the rightful king of Scotland, why he does not fit on the throne, and why ultimately he needs to be replaced. Anyways, there's also a really interesting line in the Basilikon Doron about how a wife shouldn't be involved or be curious about things that don't belong in her realm of influence. So that he should teach her to not be curious about things that belong not to her. Politics, government, obviously something like witchcraft and murder, all things outside of her sphere of influence, because of course she's supposed to rule the house and not much else. So when she says to Macbeth that he shall put this night's great business into her dispatch, that is very atypical behavior, completely unusual, because she should not be getting involved in these things. These are certainly directions that he should be setting, not the other way around. So, an atypical relationship for sure. But again, don't just look at it in the realm of Lady Macbeth being like power sick, or the fact that she's had the witches unsex her and therefore she now has all these masculine qualities. Rather, consider the fact that it's more so a reflection of Macbeth being an ineffective and unsuccessful king. Further evidence that obviously he doesn't belong on the throne. He doesn't deserve the kingship. And again, tying that back into the fact that King James is trying to legitimize his reign and garner more support for his rule. Just absolutely swarming today, aren't we? Anyways. one of the other things that King James talks about is that a wife should be ready to obey, willing to follow. And ultimately, Lady Macbeth actually is not able to follow Macbeth down his path of destruction. If you think about it, at the moment when Macbeth decides to assassinate Banquo and Fleance, obviously failing to succeed with Fleance, and he excludes her from that business. Ultimately, I think what we see there is Lady Macbeth not being able to follow her husband's direction. And where she's no longer setting out the plans, we can see her very clearly being put back into her sphere of influence, right? Back in charge of the banquet, the expectation to rule the home. We see her being kind of removed from that public sphere. But we also see that she is perhaps mentally and morally unable to follow the path of destruction. She almost seems to realize the monster that she's created. Or perhaps, she being a woman and having that feminine experience and influence really can't handle the fact that he's murdered another woman, an innocent person, and murdered children. Of course, I'm talking about Macduff's family being murdered at this point, right? I think that ultimately is the point of no return for Lady Macbeth, where, she walks around and she says, "The Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now?" in her sleepwalking speech. And so we ultimately see her failing to follow Macbeth down that path of destruction and her guilt finally catching up with her. And which you could therefore suggest is yet another sign of her not being able to obey her husband, and therefore being yet another indication that while she is not worthy of being a king's wife, Macbeth therefore is not worthy of being king, because if he was, he would never have taken a wife who could not fulfill those roles. And there are 3 specific rules, actually, that King James sets out for his son in looking for a wife. And so I'm going to talk a bit about those 3 rules. Just trying to see how many people we've got left, because obviously in the last video I wasn't quite done and I had taken out the last guy. So, of those 3 rules, one says that she should never meddle in government or the Commonwealth. Now, we've already kind of talked about that, and obviously her being the one that plots the regicide, that is a clear violation right there. The second being that she's responsible for the rule of the house, that it's her duty, therefore, to fulfill the feast. And I think you could argue that actually she fails in that respect as well, because the feast is a complete and utter failure. She's not able to maintain decorum and etiquette, and the feast kind of ends in a fiery mess because of Macbeth's hallucinations of Banquo. And then finally, that she should be subject to Macbeth's direction, which, as we've already discussed, she doesn't really take direction from Macbeth. Rather, okay. Rather, she sets the direction. She says, "What beast was it that made you break this enterprise to me?" Tells him to get on his nightgown, lest occasion call us, show us to be watchers. So we see her kind of violating all of those qualities that King James outlines for a king's wife throughout the text. And even when she tries to do the feminine wifely things, it still can be interpreted as a failure, and therefore a failure of Macbeth and his absolute inability to be a king. Well, that concludes today's video. If you enjoyed today's content, obviously like and subscribe. If you switch on notifications, you'll be able to see whenever new videos come up.